Compile Art's catalog, it's somewhat infamous for being a mixed bag, comprising standout character designs and compelling concepts muddied by messy gameplay execution. Still, in the past, the developer has released genuinely gripping RPGs such as Mega Dimension Neptunia V2 and Fairy Fencer F Advent Dark Force. These quality outings are becoming few and far between for the developer though. Another series of theirs that I've enjoyed is Death End Request, which boasts two captivating, character-driven adventures partially defined by their horror themes. And as a result, I was mildly eager for the upcoming third entry, Death End Request Code Z, hopeful that this entry would continue the quality releases in the series. Alas, and it pains me to say this game has turned out to be one of the developer's worst yet, due to the horrendously implemented gameplay design alongside a mishandled plot only slightly elevated by an endearing lead.
さやかは震える手で敵を切る。それこそが勝利への唯一の道だと信じて。最後の力。
Death End Request Code Z takes place in a copy of a mirrored Earth called World DE 1.5, all crafted by Iris, a major character from the previous two entries of the series. After the initial protagonist named Arata and his party remedied the tragic loops that her birth caused, this restored Iris's benevolence. Put simply, parallel universes are at play here, and the latest iteration was created to foster friendships and grant everyone an ideal role in achieving peace. However, antagonists who appear identical to the first game's party members begin causing chaos, leaving the new protagonist, Sayaka Hiyotari, to take the reins. Further, it should be pointed out that Sayaka is a Ludin, which is a type of in-game being with which players of the previous two games should be abundantly familiar with. And discovering Sayaka's truth as a Ludin is one of this entry's permeating mysteries. If it isn't already evident, this entry is highly reliant on you knowing the events of the first two titles in the series, since there isn't much of a genuine effort to recap or explain the facet. Personally, I feel that this story choice is more up my alley, since it means that, theoretically, the narrative can follow its own course without feeling the need to overly accommodate newcomers. Even so, the plot of Code Z is poorly paced, with almost no facet or relationship given the time to breathe and sometimes even establish itself. Making matters worse is the new protagonist, Sayaka, who isn't given much of a dynamic with the plethora of returning characters. She does manage to shine on her own in a few scenes with returning characters like Sheena, and when speaking to the player, who functions as a character of sorts in the in-universe. However, there isn't an extensive effort to make Sayaka feel like she exists in the same space as everyone else beyond general acknowledgements. It's a bizarrely awkward mismatch in execution. There are surface level efforts and nothing else really. Sadly, I didn't feel remotely connected to the cast this time around, unlike in the first two games, which had continually strong core characters or standout opening scenes that helped cement their memorability. It's honestly a shame because as a collective concept, the narrative elements Code Z tries to tackle are the most engrossing in the series, but none of them manage to stick out. When it comes to gameplay, Code Z significantly shapes up the formula. Instead of 3D dungeon exploration with turn-based bouts, a typical Compile Heart fare, Code Z adopts an over-the-head perspective and a roguelike dungeon crawling experience. As much as it could be moderately enjoyed, the combat system in the other games as well didn't seem too popular, so the change was a little expected. So I guess you can say that this radical genre shift kind of caught me off guard, but also excited me. Seeing the series approach gameplay altogether differently can indicate confidence or even ambition. Regrettably though, the coalesced execution leaves much to be desired, but let's first examine the underlying processes. The fundamentals of dungeon exploration play out just how you'd expect, with Sayaka able to move across tiles and battle enemies with single button presses, even when you're fighting an enemy diagonally from you, which all adds a minor flavor of strategy. Additionally, dashing is possible by holding down the circle button, though using it recklessly can result in perilous context should enemies be close by. Along the way, you'll find numerous items used for various functions, such as healing, inflicting damage, and buffing Sayaka for a limited number of actions. One of this game's most unique factors involves the sanity system, where gradually as you explore the dungeon and battle foes, Sayaka's sanity drains, causing visual impairment and self-harm at critically low levels. Plus, sanity can decrease significantly when you fall victim to a trap. This mechanic sounds enticing on paper, as it demands players be cognizant of how many actions and movements they perform across the floors, since given that's how in-game time passes. Yet, it ultimately becomes a frustrating, messy affair. To elaborate, sanity is restored either by leaving a dungeon entirely or by using special items called ether codes. The latter isn't exactly reliably obtained though. There is a shop with a stock of purchasable items that change, so there's no guarantee when you visit, and while ether codes can be found in dungeons randomly, there is, once again, no guarantee. You're just subjected to pure RNG for a crucial restorative that can utterly ruin your run if you lack the luck to acquire it. Of course, some degree of random chance has to be persistent in this genre, but given how pivotal sanity upkeep is, failing a run to its loss is practically always outside of your control. The sensation worsens in the later hours when the dungeons can feel a bit longer. What also doesn't help though is that once you experience a dungeon or two, you basically know how the rest of the title will go from a gameplay lens. Your approaches to battling new enemies and reaching new floors will remain mind-numbingly identical through the entirety of the game. Further, boss battles play out like standard enemy encounters, except that attack items in Sayaka's Vanquish form, which is usable via a rapidly filled gauge during combat, are justifiably worthwhile here. Regular battles are won simply by spamming default attacks. The underwhelming conclusions are then made vexing by return trips. Typically, Sayaka is tasked with escorting a character from the end of the dungeon to the outside, and this operation can be either immensely taxing or even effortless. You see, dungeons have warp points that can take you straight outside, which then completes the quest. But these returns are often plagued with the antagonistic characters known as the Glitch Girls, who are far beyond your capabilities, wandering the halls. So you really just have to get lucky reaching one of the warp stones without running into these fearsome boss-like entities. Admittedly, there is some degree of consistency in analyzing their walk cycles, and through that genuine tension is instilled. Alas, dying to a Glitch Girl leads you to restarting the dungeon, and I feel like that consequence is needlessly severe, though you do tend to get a unique death end, so there's that, I suppose. For those not in the know, death ends are a major mechanic embedded within the game's DNA and deeply integrated into the dungeons. These events are often gore-filled tragedies in which Sayaka dies in brutal, gruesome ways. The previous games did have this element, though its incorporation in Code Z is far more intricately involved gameplay-wise. Death ends here are compiled in a log accessible from the shop that you also routinely update with requirements for achieving new ones. I feel like you're going to want to witness the demise because each one imparts a skill point for the skill tree. The issue with this skill point system is that it emphasizes the frequency of death ends, which markedly reduces their impact due to the sheer number of reused CGs. In the previous titles, the death ends had genuine weight because of their placement, but here they're glorified for occasionally mild gameplay utilities, eventually making them pretty dull. These CGs are often unlocked by falling to a specific enemy or other hazardous behavior. In the later hours of my time playing, I loathed unlocking these death ends for skill points since you will undoubtedly be grinding for most of them, making it far more time consuming if you miss weaker enemies associated with death ends. Plus, purposely dying against weaker foes can become a chore since Sayaka's sanity can run out first, causing her to commit suicide before the enemy can take the final blow. There's also the fact that a handful of skills, such as the one that reduces trap damage by 10%, makes obtaining these death ends a needless struggle if you're unaware of them beforehand, making the system itself a little self-contradictory. Finding stronger variations of the foes that need to kill you is possible, but it's still a luck-infused chore regardless. In its barest essence, I appreciated the idea of this gameplay and presentation synergy, but it's taken to an excessive extent to the point where part of the franchise's horror identity feels lost in it all. The unease that's engraved within the previous two games' cores is not present in this entry whatsoever. Then, to get back on track, while the skill tree can have notable boons, the meager stat increases from some nodes don't impart much of a sense of accomplishment. Making matters even worse is that while the dungeons can have periodic individuality within their aesthetics, the game lacks enemy variety, accentuated by re-exploring dungeons from the ground up should you pursue death ends, which all doubles down on this general sense that the gameplay loop just isn't fun. So ultimately, almost everything revolving around the death ends and their correlated mechanics did not leave any meaningful impact across both narrative and gameplay lenses. Above all else, due to these intermingled ideas and dire middlesome executions, I honestly can't tell what this title's intended tone is supposed to be. Continuing with this off-kilter gameplay experience is how Code Z approaches difficulty levels. Your selection here determines whether you're experiencing a roguelike, since normal mode does not instill any consequences for dying besides death ends or successfully escaping a dungeon, and then there's elite mode where your held items and currency are lost upon death. But then, there's expert mode, where Sayaka's level is always reset after successful escapes, and after dying, your items and any are lost. Sayaka's level is reset, and even the development of your health weapons is reset. Playing the game on Expert will seemingly make approaching the weaker enemies for the death ends more reasonable since Sayaka's level is constantly reset, and that is, truthfully, kind of the case. However, even in my experience, I still had the unnecessary challenges of finding the foes that I needed to kill Sayaka before I leveled up quickly from slaying incoming foes. Not to mention the issue with retaining sanity when those enemies are finally reached. The bare minimum of the menus telling you which enemies are in the selected dungeon is available, and that's about it. Still, the option to swap between difficulties as you wish is highly appreciated as it makes progression across the skill tree and main story more approachable. On the other hand, the major positive that shone through my gameplay experience regarded Sayaka's equipable weapons, which are all gained during story progression. These tools have individual stats, specific battle traits, such as different tile ranges, and 2 central avenues of customization, patches, and memories. The former enhances stats, while the latter adds special abilities. Even though every enemy encounter felt roughly the same, swapping between these weapons and upgrading their capabilities felt satisfying to pull off. Besides, Sayaka's level, which carries over between dungeon visits, and assuming you aren't playing on Expert, the weapon growth was the only other factor that felt like I was making actual gameplay progression with a constant, noticeable impact. And before we wrap this up, on an offhanded and perhaps ill-fitting positive note, Code Z's character designs and background scenery are stunning, but this is usually the case for Compile Hearts games. I also faced no issues with crashes on PlayStation 5. Still, the chibi characters in the dungeons didn't always click with me as they're just too different from their in-game illustrations. To be brutally honest, Death End Request Code Z has shaken my faith in the future of this series, and it's a genuine shame since the latest entry has plenty of gripping hooks. The nature of the character's current prevailing reality, alongside its steady deconstruction and authenticity, is a fascinating set of ideas to unravel, doubly so with unsettling imagery and consequences. Sadly, the sloppily handled characters do a disservice to an engaging new lead who is given nowhere near enough opportunities to shine beyond plot conveniences. Further, the rush narrative, tedious growth system, and bland dungeon design make this experience more of a monotonous hassle than anything else. Unless you are a diehard fan of the Death End Request series, Code Z is undoubtedly not worth your time. Noisy Pixel is giving Death End Request Code Z a 4 out of 10. Thanks for watching. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers providing independent gaming coverage through news, reviews, previews, and more. Check out our Patreon to help support our continued growth and subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.